Good afternoon. I'm going to be fairly brief because I do want to get to your questions, but I want to first talk about voter ID and to correct the record a little bit about how we ultimately won in that case. So you'll recall that voter ID was just one piece of a massive vote suppression bill passed, House Bill 589, passed after the Supreme Court invalidated the part of the Voting Rights Act that required changes affecting voting to be submitted to the Justice Department for pre-clearance. In 2013, when the Supreme Court, in its wisdom, said, oh, we don't need that anymore, the legislature, the very day of that Supreme Court decision, legislative leaders said, oh, good, now we can go with the full bill. And when we saw the full bill, it was staggering. That they ended same-day registration, cut back on early voting, ended out-of-precinct provisional voting, and put in place one of the most strict voter ID requirements in the country. And if you heard what the Fourth Circuit ultimately said about that voter ID requirement when they struck it down, when they said that it discriminated against African Americans with surgical precision, what they were talking about was the fact that the legislature eliminated, they had previously had a voter ID bill that was passed and vetoed by Governor Perdue, that when they went back after they no longer needed to get Justice Department pre-clearance, they went back and eliminated all the forms of ID that are disproportionately held by African Americans, and they kept all the forms of ID that are disproportionately held by whites. Based on the data that they had. So from that and many other things, the court concluded that this was an intentionally racially discriminatory law. Now, the Supreme Court ultimately didn't have to review it because of you. Because voters went to the polls and elected a governor and an attorney general who were no longer willing to fight to keep that kind of law in place. So they said to the Supreme Court, we don't need you to review it, we'll stick with what the Fourth Circuit said. And ultimately the court, while there were legislative parties who tried to intervene quickly and say, no, Supreme Court, you need to review this, the Supreme Court said, okay, we won't review it this time. And stunningly, to my mind, legislative leaders, right after the Supreme Court said, we're not going to review this, the Fourth Circuit decision stands, that is now the law, the North Carolina General Assembly's attempt to restrict voters' access to voting is unconstitutional. The legislature said, oh, okay, we'll try again. So there's been a lot of talk about what they're going to try again, and I want to keep you focused on, from the litigation, we know that the same-day registration and combined with longer periods of early voting are the things that most enfranchise the most number of people. But the voter ID provision has an impact as well. And what we anticipate, so we're building the record we need to defend same-day registration and early voting as measures that really enfranchise people. But we've also heard that there's a move to, and this is Representative Lewis saying publicly in a radio interview, that they intend to propose a constitutional amendment to impose a voter ID. And the reason they're doing it as a constitutional amendment was because in addition to the federal case, we had a state court lawsuit. And there we argued that because the North Carolina Constitution sets out what the qualifications are to be a voter, and they don't say you have to have a photo ID in order to be qualified to be a voter, we were arguing that to debar someone from being able to vote because they don't have an ID creates a new qualification to be a voter that's not in the state constitution. So they have now publicly said they want to put it in the state constitution. And we know that most people have an ID, right? If you fly, if you drive, there's all sorts of ways that you need an ID. And most people want to have an ID, right? Typical populations that don't have ID, homeless people, people in nursing homes, the elderly, they want to have an ID. But the voter ID provision can be debilitating for people who don't, debilitating in the sense of their ability to vote. If they don't have one. And it also discourages a lot of people from even trying to vote. And that's something that's really hard to measure. But if someone thinks there might be something wrong with their ID, maybe they didn't get their driver's license updated when they moved, they just don't want to be hassled at the polls, it can discourage people from participating. So I think it's very important to be engaged in the public debate about whether or not voter ID is a good thing. You can help us tremendously by finding people who don't have IDs and letting us tell their stories, why they don't have an ID. It can be very powerful. Our lead plaintiff in the state court litigation was a woman who was born at home with a midwife, never had a birth certificate, and simply had tried numerous times but could not get a photo ID. So being able to make clear what the barriers are for maybe it's less than 10% of the electorate, somewhere between 7 and 10% of the electorate who don't have an ID. But for those people, their right to vote is just as precious as everyone else's. So help us find people and tell those stories so that we can fight back if a constitutional amendment is proposed. So that's voter ID. So let me turn to redistricting. What I've passed out are just the maps to show you. The first page are the Senate districts that were found unconstitutional. The second page shows you the House districts. I think before I delve into what's going to happen next, let me just say one very important thing about how we got to this point. These districts were challenged because the strategy in 2011 by the Republicans in the General Assembly was to pack black voters in supermajority numbers to weaken their influence throughout the rest of the state. And I want to tell you, every time I talk about this case, I raise up the courage of the people sitting in front of you at this table, because they were willing to say, yes, this is not good for voters overall. Even if they were perfectly happy in their own districts to have a supermajority of black voters, they had the courage to say, yes, we should challenge these districts because they're not good for black voters throughout the state. They're not good for progressive white and black voters who've been forming coalitions throughout the state, and I really applaud them for being willing to do that. So So where we are now is that the Supreme Court summarily affirmed a 3-judge trial court, which is almost unheard of. There is no other racial gerrymandering case where the Supreme Court said that it was so clear that these districts violated the Constitution, we don't even need to have briefing or oral argument, we agree. That's in essence what the Supreme Court said. So there is no remedy left for the people who want to keep these districts in place. They have to be redrawn. And the only question is when new districts will be made public and whether or not there's a special election to elect new members of the General Assembly. And we have a hearing on Thursday in federal court where those two issues will be addressed. We, the plaintiffs, have put forward 5 witnesses that we want to call. The state is going to call Kim Strack, the Director of Elections, but the defendants, the legislative defendants, have identified no witnesses, and we anticipate that that they're continuing to try to stall and drag their feet, and part of what they're going to argue is currently there is no state board of elections, and I can explain how that happened, but there isn't an appointed state board of elections right now. So they're going to say, well, we can't do anything. They filed something that said they need until November to draw new districts. Well, I kind of want to show you why we think that can't possibly be right. So the next map, map 3, this is a document that Dr. Hoffler, who's been drawing the maps for the Republicans in the legislature, filed with the court in an affidavit back in October of last year. And this shows you which parts of the state are impacted and how the county clusters have to go. So on this map, the green areas stay the same. So those districts will not be redrawn. Those legislators will stay in office until the next elections in 2018. The yellow areas are counties that stay in the same cluster, but districts within those counties have to be redrawn. And then the white areas are areas where the clusters have to be changed and the districts have to be redrawn. So, and it shows you what clusters each county has to be in. And the reason we know, well, or at least I should say what Dr. Hoffler said in his affidavit about this map, is that the whole county provision, as the state Supreme Court has interpreted it, means that you have to draw as many single county clusters, then as many 2 county clusters, then as many 3 county clusters, which actually turns out to be different from just not dividing as few counties as possible. But anyway, that's what the current state of the law is, that you have to look at compliance with the whole county provision through this concept of clustering. So on the Senate side, those little numbers, the first number is just a unique identifier for the cluster. The second number tells you how many counties are in the cluster. And then the third number tells you how many districts are in that cluster. So if you look at Wilson County, it's in a 3-county cluster with Edgecombe and Halifax. And those 3 counties together will be a single district. And so basically, under state law, if you don't have any Voting Rights Act districts, this is what you have to draw. So that's why I say they've already drawn their districts. They know what the structure is, they know what the clustering is, and all that they have to do now is subdivide those clusters that have more than one district. The same color scheme and numbering applies to the House side. So again, the green areas don't get redrawn at all. Yellow's same cluster, but districts within the cluster will be redrawn, and then the white areas, the clusters change, and the districts need to change. So we have been fortunate that the NAACP filed an amicus brief in this case, arguing that the legislature should not be allowed to pass any more laws now that the constitutionality of these districts has finally been determined and that they are unconstitutional. Similarly, the Southern Environmental Law Center sent a letter to the governor saying that and to the legislative leaders, that if they attempt to override the governor's veto of some environmental legislation, that they will argue that the legislators currently are usurpers and under state law have no legal authority to act. Don't know how far those arguments will get, but we will be saying to the court that those things compel that these districts should be redrawn and special elections should be had before the next session of the legislature, which the next regular session is in May of next year. We are proposing to the court a schedule that would have primaries on December 5th and the general election on March 6th. My prediction is if the court agrees with us that special elections are warranted, we'll know that within a week. If they don't agree, and the only issue is when do they have to redraw, and they'll just use the new districts in 2018, they might take longer to write their opinion there. So we are also trying to separate drawing the districts from the actual special election, and the reason is, if my supposition is right, if they've already drawn these districts, they can recruit candidates. They can raise money. They can do all those behind the scenes, getting ready to participate in elections things because they know what the districts look like. Whereas Democrats don't know what the districts will look like, don't have the power to do those things, and I think that's why they want to delay and delay and delay until November this year before they make public the districts that we are pretty certain they've actually already drawn. So we will be urging the court to require them to draw right away, and then also have special elections so that the legislature elected from unconstitutional districts no longer has any legitimacy and authority to act. Let me just say, so that's legislative redistricting. Quick word about congressional redistricting. We were scheduled to go to trial in a partisan gerrymandering case challenging the congressional districts that were redrawn in 2016 when the court delayed the trial. So we are now asking for a trial this fall. The defendants are delay. They're saying that the partisan gerrymandering case should not go to trial until after the Supreme Court decides a case that's pending from Wisconsin. We'll see what happens there, but that's just kind of up in the air. But finally, we say a word about judicial redistricting, because this legislature has not stopped at redrawing county lines, city councils, school boards. They're now proposing a House Bill 717 that would totally redraw district court districts and superior court districts. We've taken a look at this, and we really believe this will harm black citizens. They are reducing the number of judges serving the predominantly African-American counties, and they're transferring them actually not to urban areas, but to other more rural counties that are predominantly white. Yes. And what does it mean when you have fewer judges? It means your case doesn't get heard as quickly. Whether that's a civil case or a criminal case, you're coming back to court more frequently and you can't get your case heard. There's a lot of reasons why it's not a good thing to have fewer judges serving a population. So We have a lot of other complaints about what they're planning to do with the judicial districts. I have the maps for the district court, superior court, and prosecutorial districts if you want to look at them. But that's something that we hope that they will not do, but that seems to be another effort.
And I think under at least the last proposal, I saw Wilson, our district would lose a superior court judge and a district court judge. And I do want to appreciate the legal community and the judges themselves, I believe, with limited, within their ethical roles, and the DA for, I think, coming together and slowing that process down. And we hope it can be completely diverted, but that is another challenge we will face. And an additional issue is many school boards, they are moving to change local government and school board elections all to partisan elections. And if you can believe it, they want districts where they think it will help them elect more Republicans, or the opposite, whichever method would help them elect Republicans. So there's a complete campaign to change the look of elections, the landscape for elections. So now the floor, are you ready for questions? The floor is open for questions for Anita about any of these issues.
I've listened to you, explain what is going on, but I wrote my question down so I wouldn't forget anything, and I want to ask you and the legislators that are here, I want to know what your gut feeling is, as to the way these maps are going to be redrawn this time. And do you think it will allow just enough room for the Democratic minority to have the ammunition to slow down the majority? Because, from all this insanity that they are causing all across the state, and I know it depends on the voters and the vote, going out to vote, but I just want to know you all's insight as to what do you, I want to know what you think.
Okay, let's start with you for a gut feeling, and then any members who want to answer.
So we're a nonpartisan organization. I can tell you that people have told me the analysis is that they will no longer, the Republicans cannot hold on to a veto-proof majority in both houses. What I know from, once these districts are redrawn, even if they draw them, anytime they're subdividing a cluster, they do have some discretion in how they draw the lines, and in places like Mecklenburg County, that can actually swing a lot. In other words, when you're drawing the districts wholly within Mecklenburg County, you can draw them so a majority are Republican, or you can draw them so a majority are Democrat. So I'm not suggesting that the whole county provision eliminates all discretion or ability to gerrymander, but what I do think is that it puts some brake on them, on that ability, and while they were packing black districts and packing Democratic districts, the Republican districts had more narrow margins, right? Because they were trying to get as many of them as possible. So anytime you start making some shifts, I think it's clear that they just will not be able to have the same number of seats that they have now. And I'll also say, my look at this, because we're always concerned about protecting the right to vote of African American voters, I don't think that the representation of people elected that are candidates of choice of black voters will go down in the new maps. That's fine.
Now, and they may not be black, but they may be, but they may have their candidates of choice. Would you agree? Okay. Does everybody understand? And so that's where strategies may need to be different. Linda had her hand up, and there was another hand over here. Can somebody? Was there another hand over here too? I know Coleman. Representative Coleman.
My question, and you may have already touched on it just a little, is the loss. In looking at the legislative districts, how could that possibly affect the number of minorities that would be elected as compared to what we presently have, and the new lines that will be drawn if we're looking at those legislative clusters as you've identified?
So we did not challenge every majority black district. So there will still be majority black districts in the state. There are some people who, if you're just asking of the current black elected legislators that we have, there are a couple who are in districts that will be very challenging for them to win, but there will be new districts created that, either they move or someone else can be elected from. So that's why I say, I don't think, if the question is candidates of choice of black voters, I think there will be more of those, but certainly not less. And I think there are very few of the current members of the Legislative Black Caucus who are likely to face difficulties in getting elected.
We're going to hear from the members, but correct me if I'm wrong. Massage for me to make this statement correct. Under the Voting Rights Act, we aren't really guaranteed black representatives, if you follow, unless for some reason discrimination keeps us from getting those representatives. But we are guaranteed the right to elect voters of our choice that represent our interests. Am I accurate? Would that be accurate, or how would you couch that in there?
Right, well, so let me just give an example. So Senator Garou in Senate District 32, you may know that Senate District 32 was not a majority black district, but Senator Garou, who's white, was the candidate of choice of black voters. And she was drawn out of the district. The legislative record was, we're changing these lines to keep you out of 32 because you're white, and we think a black person should represent black voters in Senate District 32. And they made 32 then become majority black. And that's the kind of race consciousness that the court said is beyond what the Constitution permits. So some of the majority black districts, historically in the state, it's always been true that some of the majority black districts have elected white candidates. And it's also true that black candidates have been elected in districts as low as 20–25% black.
And originally, when by both explicit and implicit discrimination, we were kept from electing black voters. Electing black officials, our early strategies have been to elect black officials. When whites were not supporting black officials, and when all kind of strategies, whether it was at large and other strategies, were keeping us from electing them. We're at a new era, in a sense. Does that mean that those strategies still aren't happening? Because we know that in Wilson County and other some of our counties, winning county-wide elections is still a challenge for African American voters. But in some of these districts, there is a mixed record of success. And so our focus now has to be, in addition to electing officials of color, how do we also look at electing people of other races who also will represent our interests? That is, we're influencing the election of the other members as well. That's the best way I can say it. Now let's hear from some of our members, because you asked the gut feeling of the members on this issue of what's going to happen, race. You know what the drill is. They got mics, I think.
Okay.
And then I'll come to you.
I was going to comment that.
Representative Butterfield, I think Representative Willingham was going to say something.
I'm sorry, I couldn't see his hand. Okay.
That's okay. First of all, let me say that the way we see it, when I say we, the Democrats in the House right now, we feel that after the redrawing of the lines that we will be able to elect more representatives who would champion our cause, whether black or white, but we don't feel like we're going to lose our Democratic members. The other thing too is that one of the things that we are having a problem with is that, just as mentioned, the Republicans right now, they kind of know what the districts are. I'm on the recruiting committee. We're trying to recruit people around the state to run for office in these districts that we feel like we might win. But we have a problem because we don't know what the district is going to be. So we don't want to recruit somebody to run in the district, then when they redraw the lines, they're not able to run. So that's a problem. But I think that looking at it, we feel like after the redrawing of the district, we will be able to break the supermajority. And I think that's one of our major tasks right now. We're not going to be able to get a majority in the House, but we feel like we have a much better chance of breaking that supermajority. And this will put us at the negotiating table now that we have a Democratic governor. So this will be good, and we're hoping too that there is an election this year rather than waiting until next year. And I guess everybody's aware that, of course, the House has called a meeting of the Redistricting Committee for this Tuesday, which I'm a member, and I think, Gene, are you a member? But we'll be meeting this Tuesday, and I don't know what that meeting is going to entail. So we just have to wait and see.
Gene, do you want to go next? And then the senators.
Similar to what Representative Willingham mentioned, I'm on the Redistricting Committee, served on it before they did the Congressional districts. And I can tell you that they do not listen to us when they're in the majority. So those lines will be drawn pretty much based on what the Republican leadership, who's the majority party, wants, and they probably already have them ready as stated earlier. I think it's important that we get more Democrats elected, and hopefully this will make that possible, so we can at least not keep seeing people override the governor's vetoes. And as you notice, there have been about 5 times when the governor has vetoed bills, and they override it because they have the majority. So supermajority is not helping us. And finally, I think the issue of double bunking needs to be addressed for the group in terms of people who are existing legislators being put together in the same district with the redistricting and the impact that it might have as it relates to African Americans.
Okay, so let's hear from the other senators, and then we'll keep double bunking on the table. If you all want to add anything. I think it's on the bottom. Is it on? It says on. No, that's a different.
Okay, here we go. Just the gut feel when that was the question. I'm going to be as blunt as I can. What we're talking about is obviously when you talk about minorities being able to elect candidates of choice, they very well may have the ability to elect candidates of choice. However, the other part of that is they just may not look like them. And we're being clear in terms of what that means. Now, having said that, what you're talking about is across the board much, much more competitive districts. I can tell you when I was first elected in 2008, I was elected in a district that probably had a fairly over 20% African American in it. So there's the possibility, and you know, I'm a living witness that, in particular, African American candidates can still run in certain districts and be competitive in those districts. But let's also be realistic too. You know, what we're talking about at the end of the day, and I'm just going to say it this way, in more competitive districts, I'm going to say 2 things. With more competitive districts, and this has been one charge that I've continued to talk about, is the cost of these elections. You're possibly talking about a whole lot more money going into races across the board, and therefore the need to generate and more people coming around and making those asks for those dollars to make the contribution. But then the other thing, at the end of the day, when you're talking about more competitive races across the board, and it's one thing that we know why we understand and love Governor Hunt and his wife so much, and that is because there's no substitute, and hear me loud and clear, no substitute for getting out there, knocking on doors, and being out and making more contact with people, because there's absolutely no way you will even think about winning races if you're totally disconnected from your constituents. And it's just going to mean more retail politics, knocking on the doors. It's going to mean that we're going to need more people. If you're a Democrat and you want to see more Democrats elected, then your candidate of choice, when you're talking about a Senate district of 190,000 people, can't go knock on all those doors. they're going to need volunteers and resources if, and now this is the campaign that more recently the governor, working in conjunction with the Democratic Party, has rolled out, and that is the Break the Majority campaign. So if we are going to be successful at breaking any majorities, it's going to take a collective effort, unity, and really articulating across the board our values and not necessarily our color.
Just real quick, I want to explain how this affects all of us. While Senate District 3 was not one of the districts that were quote-unquote gerrymandered, by virtue of my district being surrounded with Angela and Dawn, then that affects a shift in the counties that I will be representing. So this is something that we are all in together. Our #1 priority is to be able to sustain the governor's veto, to be able to pick up seats in both chambers, and we can only do this through redistricting. But I would be remiss if I didn't share the possible things that could happen. And if they choose to do one of the maps that shows Nash County being pulled out and put with Johnson, Sampson, Duplin, and I believe it's one other county, that draws Senator Bryant out of her originally represented district. And then when you look at some of the other counties, it's a 2-hour and 41-minute drive for me to get from where I live in Northampton County to the easternmost point in my district geographically. That is a huge geographic area that takes a lot of finances to be able to serve and represent and get in the area. I also want to highlight something critical that Senator Davis said. You will be able to elect candidates of your choice, but they don't always look like you. If you look at District 23 in the House, represented by Shelley Willingham, Edgecombe and Martin County. Martin County had a representation of 49.3 African American, about 49.7 white. And Edgecombe is predominantly African American, but Representative Shelley Willingham is the first African American to be able to serve that district. They could choose to draw the district so that they double bunk us with Republicans, and that will knock us out. So as we go into this, the imperative is whatever the districts are that we have to face, because I believe one time during redistricting, Dawn, you were double bunked with a Republican and you lost your seat, right? Was that with Senator Lewis Baker? Okay. They separated those districts. But there could be the possibility that if we're double bunked. So we're glad that you're here today, and we are going to be going across the state, because at the end of the day, we cannot do anything without an empowered electorate. There's a reason why they want to take away your vote and suppress your vote. So we need everybody to get engaged and show up so that we can put good people in office who can do what we need to do to move this state forward.
I just want to make a comment. AP Governor represents the city of Wilson, because our positions are non-party. It's real easy to overlook us. But decisions that you make at the state level affect us first. So we have to be diligent about what's going on. And
can you put it a little closer?
We are non-party here, but you know, your bigger jurisdiction like Charlotte, Greensboro, your Winston-Salem, they're party. But municipal officials represent over half the population of this state. That's something we have to kind of stay in touch with y'all and be involved, because we all are in it together. I just want to mention that. It can be tricky. That's how come we go to all these meetings. When we lobby, I'm not only lobbying with people I represent that represent me. I lobby with everybody that I know. Thank you.
Yes. Madam Chair, I make a brief comment real quick. The comment that I would like to just, it's a disclaimer, be on the record as saying, as Anita has mentioned with social justice, as AP you've mentioned with certain municipalities, as the parliamentarian of the North Carolina Legislative Black Caucus, I do want to be on the record as saying that the Legislative Black Caucus itself is nonpartisan. So I just want to make sure we understand that. So as we speak and we're asked for just our gut feels, is not necessarily reflective of the Legislative Black Caucus itself. And the other thing I would just add and share, we actually have had in the past a Republican member of the North Carolina Legislative Black Caucus. So.
You want to say something now? Okay.
I just want to say that what AP mentioned about the local elections being nonpartisan. Well, let me tell you that the trend in the House is to make all elections partisan, all of them. We're reaching down with everything, school board,
whether you want it or not.
Whether you want it or not. So we've done that on a number of occasions, and that's the trend. So that's another reason why it's so important that we be in a position that we can negotiate and try to stop some of these things, because that is coming.
We can dance. We can live with it. I just have to around.
We'll be over there after you.
I just want to make a comment. Unfortunately, when you talk about this stuff publicly, you get the enemy, they can use it against you, like she talked about the Constitution was not in the Constitution. So now they want to change it. And also I want to talk about Senate District 3. I remember when we first got that district, and I fought the powers that be because I wanted to get a black person elected for the first time, but the money came to town and our folk were bought out. So we also got to keep in mind that we can't be bought out. We got a role to play, and we can make some of these things happen.
Okay, you got one?
I have a question about, I know this is specifically about North Carolina, but what we're talking about here today, I know you mentioned the Wisconsin case, and what we're talking about here today is a trend that's moving across the country. And now President Trump has established this voter fraud commission, and he's asking the states to submit data for this voter fraud commission. And the question I have is Attorney General Josh Stein, is he going to be submitting any of our voter data for this voter fraud commission that he has established? And do you feel that if any of our data is submitted to that commission, is that going to place us in any type of vulnerable state?
So I can only tell you what I've read in the papers. It's my understanding that North Carolina took the same position as almost every Secretary of State, which was that they would hand over what's already public, but nothing more. And then that was put on hold because a whole flurry of lawsuits have been filed against the commission, and I don't think any data has been turned over. I think what a lot of people don't realize is how much data is already publicly available. And I think there's huge potential for mischief by this commission. I hope that the lawsuits against it will be successful. But I also hope that people, I was deeply disturbed to read in the paper that over 400 people contacted the State Board of Elections asking them to, take out their voter registrations. We can't let the commission win by intimidating people. And so we have to, and maybe we decide that there's other ways to protect our state data, but we can't, we have to be strong about, this is an effort to deter people from voting and to create false claims of fraud, and we have to really be on the offensive to say, no, it's everyone's duty to participate in elections and participate in government and not be intimidated, because that's what they want.
And then the Republicans say, oh, well, those people must have been fraudulent voters anyway. That's why they want to withhold their information. Governor Hunt.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to tell all of you all how proud we are to have you here in Wilson County. And if you'll go back and look at the elections last year, we had our wonderful Chairman Betty McCain. Where is she here? And we've got our wonderful new chairman, Linda Cooper Suggs, up there. And they gave us great leadership. And you all in this room did the work. And you know how it came out in our county. Now Wilson County's got to spread that all across the state. Folks, this is so important. I'm so thankful that our legislators have come here to share this information with us. And Anita Earls, a wonderful attorney who represents the people, average people. You know, she doesn't get paid that big money that some of the right wing has and puts out. She just works for the average people. But I want to say that what you all are doing here now on redistricting, I think is exactly the right thing. I think it's the constitutional thing, and I think it's the moral thing. We are so proud of the work that you all do in the legislature, and I want everybody in this room to understand that if this effort is successful, and if these unconstitutional districts that we now have are thrown out, as they should be by the courts, I hope by the federal courts shortly.
They have been Governor Hunt, they have been thrown out by Clarence Thomas.
I know it, that's right. So now we need to get some constitution. Now we need some constitutional districts. And I want to say one final thing to all of you now, and I've maybe know a little more about this than average person does, having been involved in a lot of this stuff. If we get these new constitutional districts, good ones, fair ones, we're going to see our legislators here today in the chairmanships in the Senate and the House that they don't have a chance for now. Our people, these great leaders right here, and I know them, and I know what they're doing. I'm looking forward to calling you Mr. Chairman, Miss Chairman. You're from our area. We appreciate you. We've elected you. And if we get this done now, if these lawsuits are successful, folks, we're going to have a big voice. We're going to have support for our good governor from our county next door that he carried here in Wilson County. And I just want to say how important this is. This is the most crucial thing going on in America today, I think. And I thank all of you for your great leadership and what you're going to be doing in the chairmanships in the future.
We're going to wrap this up here. Anita wants to make a couple of closing remarks. She'll be here at the end. I also put some Post-it notes on your tables. You can write out questions with your name and contact information. We can even get back to you. They are at your tables if for some reason we aren't getting to you. Your closing remarks.
Well, I just wanted to emphasize and be clear that while I never underestimate the Republicans' creativity and willingness to break the law to stay in power, because that is exactly what they've done, their own expert testified that this is what the district clusters have to look like, under oath. Maybe they'll come up with something different, but what that means for Wilson County, you know your districts. You'll be a single district for the House, and you will be part of a 3-county cluster for the Senate. You'll be part with Edgecombe and Halifax in the Senate district. So keep that in mind as you think about candidate recruitment and what you can start doing now. And Senator Bryant asked me to just say a word about this. In many ways we're in a constitutional crisis because when the governor calls a special session to redistrict and the legislators on their own say, we think that's unconstitutional and we're not going to do it, well, who gave the legislators the ability to decide what's unconstitutional? That's what the courts are supposed to decide. Well, the courts are deciding whether the legislature's power grab from the governor to try to restructure the Board of Elections, put it with the Board of Ethics, make it an 8-member board, 4 from each party, so it's stymied, whether all of those changes are constitutional, that's what's pending now in front of the state Supreme Court. And on Thursday, the court, in an order signed by Judge Morgan, said that the governorship does not have to do anything further to enforce that new law until the state Supreme Court decides whether or not it's constitutional. But they also said that if there's anything that needs to happen to administer elections, So while they're in a period of time when we have no appointed state board of elections, it means that they can't appoint the local boards. And if you have a 3-member local board and you only have 2 members, there are some things that local boards have to decide about the administration of elections that requires 3 members. So if that comes up in any county, I think that there's a provision, there's a way to get that resolved, and you shouldn't be shy about letting the state elections board director know about that. The case has been set for oral argument in the Supreme Court on August 28th, and I anticipate they'll move pretty quickly. They're aware that there are municipal elections coming up this year. So,
thank you, Anita. I just want to emphasize that the Southern Coalition for Social Justice is a nonprofit 501c3 organization that has been representing all of our interests in all of these cases over several years. They do need and take contributions. She will take checks today while she's here visiting with you. So, and you can also go online. Thank you.
Thanks for that commercial. I have the delightful challenge of presiding